Hello there. My name is Monica Burns, and welcome to Technology Essentials in Education. Today, I'm chatting with Allison Rodman all about rethinking professional development in the age of AI. Allison is an educator, the founder of the Learning Loop and ASCD author, and she brings a fantastic perspective as a former classroom teacher, a school board member, and director of professional learning. She has so much to tap into from her prior roles and her current roles that inform today's conversation. She shares how we can leverage AI to move beyond the traditional sit and get sessions and create more personalized, high impact learning that really respects teachers' time and fuels their growth. Let's get into the conversation. This episode is brought to you by Jotform. Jotform provides an all in one solution to streamline administrative tasks, enhance community engagement, and foster innovation. Using their no code drag and drop forms and workflows, your teams can securely collect and store data, automate tasks, and collaborate on team resources. Educational institutions are also eligible for a 30% discount on Jotform Enterprise. Head to their website to learn more. Jotform.com/enterprise/education. Welcome to the podcast. I am so excited to chat with you today about rethinking professional development in the age of AI, a big topic for folks inside of education. But before we get into all of that, can you share with listeners a bit about your role in education? What does your day-to-day look like?
Absolutely, Monica. So, my work in education really focuses on the adult learning side of things, right? We
Mhm.
spend a lot of time thinking about how we're designing curriculum and how we're facilitating lessons for students. But one of the most critical pieces of that is how the educators across our system learn and continue to refine their practice. So, I partner with systems leaders and school leaders, as well as teacher leaders, to really think about the professional learning experiences that we're designing and facilitating for adults across our educational system.
And that has such a huge impact on all those things you just mentioned, right? Curriculum, formative assessment, right? All of these pieces are influenced by how adult learners are able to take in new information and apply it to their practice. So, you've worked in a variety of roles in education that I'm sure have, made an impact on the decisions you make, right? When you're leading professional development, professional learning opportunities for adult learners. You've worked as a classroom teacher, assistant principal, director of professional development. How did those roles shape how you think about professional learning today?
One of the things that really emerges as I've, stepped into each of those roles, I've also been a board member, so I've seen kind of the other side
Right?
of the table, right, at
Yep.
times, um, is thinking about how we are personalizing the experience. So, too often, for as much as we know about adult learning and education in general, and as much as we ask of teachers and leaders on the differentiation and personalization front for
Mhm.
students, we're still just not quite there in the professional learning piece, right? So we have the one size fits all sit and get PD, whether it's the beginning of the year or it's that one day that we come into and we know it's just going to be like a sit and get in the auditorium.
Mhm.
And while we've started leveraging better perhaps than before some of those grade level team meetings and those
Mhm.
department or curriculum team meetings in a way that's a little bit more personalized, it hasn't quite creeped over into those school wide or those district wide professional learning systems just yet in a lot of the districts that I partner with.
Yeah, it's interesting because literally, I don't know, Friday, we're recording this on a Wednesday. Friday of last week, I sent out a survey to a group that I'm working with, like the
Mhm.
organizers of the survey, and said, like, can you send this out to the people who are going to join us for the day? Because I know they're coming from a whole bunch of different places. We only have this one day together, and I want to go into that day with a sense of what their experiences are, when they read the description for the day, what they thought that meant as it connected to their practice, and they chose that they were going to spend this, Monday with me, later this year. And when you visit schools and districts across the country, I'm sure that you're thinking, right, about the kind of trends in different spaces, right? The things that you're seeing in all these different corners, of the world in some cases. I know you do international work, but what patterns do you notice in how professional development is currently designed?
So I love that you brought up that idea of the survey, Monica, right? I think we're really good at that, like giving some value or evaluating our professional learning experiences at the end of the session, right? So
Mhm.
often I facilitate and leaders are like, okay, can we send out a survey? Can we know what that looks like? But there's so much power in administering, as you did, that survey ahead of time to be able
Mhm.
to kind of prime learners, set some of those expectations, get a sense yourself as a facilitator as to what they are expecting of the session or the
Yeah.
experiences that they bring, so that you can then craft your examples and your experiences as well as target your strategies to the people that are actually in the room. And I think sometimes in the work that you and I do, because it's often in conferences or with bigger
Mhm.
groups, it
Yeah.
becomes that much more difficult to do that type of pre assessment. But when schools and districts have that opportunity, especially when there's those multi session ongoing professional learning experiences, it's so incredibly valuable to make sure that you're maximizing those precious minutes that you have with teachers in those collaborative spaces, because we know we never have enough of that time that we want.
Yeah, I think that idea of making the most of the time we have together, right? How proactive can we be, right? We're ready to be reactive in the moment,
Yes.
right? We're ready
Yeah.
to pivot if necessary, or have a lunch break and say, okay, now the afternoon's going to feel a little different, right? Based on how the morning went.
Yeah.
But the more that we can gather that information and go into these spaces, is massive. And, in your work, I'm sure you're seeing this a lot, maybe questions that are coming up from the educators you support, or just as part of your planning process or even admin process. In your work, where do you see AI having the most practical value in professional development?
Yeah, so it's really playing a role in my work, I would say, in two critical spaces right now, Monica. So, one is when I'm doing the design and prepping for my own
Mhm.
facilitation, right? Being able to take some of that pre assessment or survey data that you're referencing and kind of put it into some different chatbots with additional
Yep.
context about the partner and really think paired with the content what is going to be not just the best approach, but also the best examples and strategies for this particular group of educators. The other place that I'm really seeing it show up is in the sessions themselves. We haven't done a lot of work to support educators in being as precise and thoughtful as we possibly can about their prompts, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
So I think they see AI as this like a Google on steroids, if you will, in terms of just a
Mhm.
search engine,
Yeah.
without really understanding the power if you are so incredibly thoughtful and operate with intention on the side of the prompts. So a good amount of my professional learning work lately, quite honestly, is not just kind of facilitating the content and the strategies and
Mhm.
that social construction time with educators, but helping them to understand and then actualize how they can then use a chatbot or use some of those different AI tools in support of the content to make their work that much easier. One thing I've been kind of crafting, I know you do a lot with AI kind of on helping teachers and leaders think about how they can make some of their work more efficient on kind
Yeah.
of the planning side.
Mhm.
Um, I've been doing that a lot with professional learning facilitators. So,
Mhm.
helping them think about, okay, how can you put in these precise details? And how can you give the educators in your sessions prompts and frames and things to really leverage and accelerate their work to the next level in a way that I don't think is happening in a lot of spaces right now.
And I think there's a really nice parallel to some of the professional development conversations people may have had in the past, particularly around assessment, right? Like you want to
Hmm.
be really thoughtful with what question you're asking connected to your success criteria. You want to have that precise language in order to make sure you're assessing the right information, right? The right for you in that
Yep.
moment of what you're trying to gather. So that idea of precision and being intentional, right, are not novel, right, for
Hmm.
educators who have done this work in the past. And a few, I'm just using assessment as an example. You're probably pulling
Yep.
differentiation in there too, right? But this idea that we're now taking this skill, particularly for veteran educators who might feel like, I have this big knowledge base. How can I connect it to some of these new tools, right?
Hmm.
The understanding that someone has of that precision, right, of being really thoughtful and intentional, they can then translate, right, to this new tool that they have, right, which in this
Yep.
case is an AI chatbot, like the examples that you gave. So, from a personalization standpoint, like you
Hmm.
mentioned, we do this so much. We are very, right, front of mind when we talk about personalization for students as learners.
Hmm.
What does this look like for adult learners? How can AI support personalization in professional learning without isolating educators from one another, kind of in their own chatbot world, if you
Yeah.
will?
So it's interesting, right? Because I see AI being used for a lot of the surface level tasks, like
Mhm.
write me this field trip permission slip, or help me craft this email to a parent, or,
Mhm.
help me write this staff newsletter, which it's an incredibly powerful tool for those functions, right? I
Mhm.
wish when I was, still in the classroom that I had that tool,
Mhm.
because wow. But on the professional learning side of things, I think what folks need to understand, particularly those designing professional learning right now, is that the examples that are in sort of the machine, if you will, right, for those bots
Mhm.
to pull on are not quite as strong just yet as some of the things that we've been doing on kind of the surface level side of
Yeah.
things. So we've got to think really thoughtfully about the content that we're kind of putting into the project and not just doing an open-ended search. So
Yeah.
I'll give you an example, right? I could say, I'm designing a professional learning community session for a group of teachers in this content area, these grade levels. It's a 90-minute session. Give me some ideas on how to facilitate. And it'll come back with a few resources and a couple think pair shares and things like that. But in the andragogical space, when we talk about adult
Mhm.
learning, those really aren't the most powerful ways to facilitate those sessions. So thinking about, what are the protocols that we're adding to some of those chatbots ahead of time? What are the thinking routines that we're giving it as a model so that when it's helping us as a thought partner kind of work through the design of those sessions, we're
Mhm.
moving beyond that surface level and really getting to those powerful professional learning sessions that are going to, one, help teachers collaborate, but two, actually move those ideas and strategies from conversation to practice.
Yeah.
So we've got to get just a little bit more thoughtful about the information that we're providing kind of the system to help it be that really strategic partner for us.
A quick note from the presenter of today's episode, Jotform. Jotform lets you build a form in minutes. Student survey forms, homework submission forms, online quizzes, and so much more. You can start from scratch, or if you want to get a head start, check out their collection of free form templates designed with teachers, schools, and districts in mind. Learn more about Jotform and how educational institutions can get 30% discount on Jotform Enterprise. Head to their website to learn more. Jotform.com/enterprise/education. And I think that's a great example of jumping from a beginner, right, interaction with the tool to a more intermediate. You don't even have to be, right, at an advanced coding a website or prompting to create something really robust, but just being able to go from I'm asking a question or giving a task to I've opened up this gem in Gemini or this
Yep.
project, right, in Claude or ChatGPT. I think they both use the project language, right? And
Hmm.
I've given instructions to say, these are the protocols that are always important to me, or this is how I like to frame things, or this is important for this reason. And then you're using that, that project, right, to make it happen as opposed to just opening up a chatbot without that additional context, right? You're
Yep.
training that model or maybe adding that extra layer of information, which is so important. And, it kind of gets to this next piece that I think is front of mind for administrators, for those who are facilitating professional learning, or maybe
Mhm.
taking part, in a professional learning experience as a participant, which is around, guardrails. Like what guardrails should districts consider as they integrate AI into professional learning systems?
So, what I don't want to happen is that we get so focused on the AI end of things, right? That we just kind of bring teachers into a room together, put them in front of laptops, and then have
Mhm.
them operate and plan independently, right?
Yeah.
That's not good learning practice for students or adults. There really is value in that social construction and helping people troubleshoot, share resources, give one another's different perspectives and insights
Mhm.
than what's going to happen when you're solely using a chatbot as your thought partner.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure, first and foremost, that we're not overlooking that and just kind of
Mhm.
letting AI do all the work
Yeah.
because there is so much value in that relationship building. I was facilitating a multi-session workshop last night, and we had kind of part five going on together.
Mhm.
And one of the teachers had shared this great strategy during one of our previous sessions, and it was so awesome to hear the other teachers come back and share about how they had implemented that same strategy and this was going really well.
Mhm.
And that was completely organic. That didn't come as a part of my design. It didn't come as a part of my
Mhm.
facilitation necessarily, but it wouldn't have happened if there wasn't space for that authentic
Right.
collaboration.
Yeah.
So making sure that, we're not doing everything asynchronous, we're not doing everything virtual. We are still making space for that conversation and that relationship building that we know is so important to the learning process, regardless of what position educators hold within the system.
And
And
when
then
we see things, yeah,
yeah,
and
go
know
ahead.
that they work, right? Like we know that
Right.
these pieces work, like we should lean
Yeah.
into it. Yeah, no, keep going.
Yeah. So like, being able to say, oh, you know what? I found this. Let me upload it. Let me share it so that we're not duplicating one another's work.
Hmm.
And then I think the other guardrail that's really important is making sure that educators also understand the limitations
Yeah.
of AI, right? Like it is a super helpful tool in terms of curation and organization
Mhm.
and processing. But again, it comes down to the quality of the input
Yeah.
that we provide, as well as the commitment to review on the back end so
Mhm.
that when that product comes out or that idea comes out, we don't just take it at face value, but instead
Mhm.
we're bringing it back to our team. We're having conversations about it to say, is this the right learning move for our adults, our students in this space right now?
Yeah, and having that expert eye, that's, this extra layer that you're bringing in, right? That human in the loop, a term
Hmm.
we hear a lot, right, in the AI spaces. And, for the groups that you work with, right? And we think about instructional coaches, school leaders, right, who are navigating all of this. AI has an impact on their role, right? I'm working with a cohort of New York coaches, instructional coaches, and they've worked in the past thinking about technology integration more generally, right? But now with AI, it's a different kind of modeling, right? It's a different kind of walking through a process, right? It's changed the way that they might introduce something where there is not just a here it is, let's try it out, now go, right? It as a different kind of support, I guess, like as part of that.
Hmm.
And, I'm summarizing that without all the nuances of the
Yeah.
conversations that we've been having, but, it's a shift, I guess, is what I'm getting at. So, how does AI, just in general, change the role of instructional coaches and school leaders in supporting teacher growth?
So, one of the areas I see that both of those groups using AI a lot right now is to support them with the generation or the refinement of their observation notes and
Mhm.
some of their coaching and growth guidance following, those observations or those coaching conversations. And is it helpful? Absolutely. But if not used appropriately, can it come off as feeling very inauthentic
Mhm.
and you know, actually ends up stalling the growth process rather than accelerating it. So,
Mhm.
in that work, I think a few things need to happen. One is the authenticity piece, where we've got to kind of make sure that the system, whatever that bot or whatever that tool or platform is that you're using, really understands you and understands your relationships, whether that's, sharing some of your tone or your voice or, some of those pieces so that it really does become kind of an augmentation of your work and
Mhm.
not a replacement for your voice.
Yeah.
I think that that is critical. The other thing is to also recognize that this thing that we do in education isn't like the production of a business product, right? Or even a
Right.
business service in some cases. Like we're developing humans at all levels of the system, from our pre-K, kiddos, all the way up through educators that have been teaching for 30, 40 years. And with that certainly comes a science of learning where
Mhm.
things are, direct, black and white. But any of us who've ever stepped foot in a classroom know that there's this art of learning
Right.
as well.
Yes. Mhm.
And I think, what I'm finding, particularly with those coaches and leaders in the observation space, is, we can bring in a transcript of a lesson and try and get it to match up to a particular framework in terms of performance levels and then help us with observation notes. But that's really the science of it. There's this nuance and this art that the system doesn't quite have yet. And I think, if not monitored carefully with that authentic voice and those, real relationships, can start to damage some of the progress that we've made in education and lose that effectiveness for the sake of efficiency.
Oh, absolutely. And it's a good reminder as we, talk about these shifts that are happening across different spaces in this, age of AI, if you will, right? And for
Yeah.
professional learning, opportunities for professional development, right? Sessions someone might attend, right? There's going to be this impact. And I think it's important
Mhm.
to make sure that there's the human component, right? Sticking with something that is so human, right? By nature, right? This
Yeah.
work that we all do. So where, as we kind of wrap up today, I want to make sure people can connect with you and all of that. But before we share that info, you've written books on professional learning, you've got a lot of publications, right? Is there a concept from one of your pieces of work, one of your books, that feels especially relevant for schools who are navigating AI today?
So, my first book that came out in 2019, Monica, Personalized Professional Learning, was really intended as a guidebook for district and system leaders who want to create that more personalized structure.
Yeah.
And then with the second piece that came out just a couple of years ago, Still Learning, which really focused on
Mhm.
strengthening that professional and organizational capacity. It was about taking it back to the adult learner, taking it back to the team, and understanding how those different relationships and interconnectedness operate, right? When we're trying to become those deliberately developmental organizations. And I think both of those are critical foundations for leaders, whether you're a teacher leader, a district leader, a school leader, even a board member, to think about what your systems look like and what the relationships within those systems, how they operate. But the work that I'm really engaged in right now that feels most critical is around how we're doing the actual design and facilitation. So, what is the relationship between kind of the old school way to do it and utilizing some of these newer AI tools to take things to the next level, to really dig in more personally? And I'm super excited to be presenting on this at the ISTE and ASCD conference this
Mhm.
summer, as well as getting, some new pieces kind of out into the education community very shortly to support leaders as you're thinking about your long-term professional learning plans for
Mhm.
next year, but also as you're beginning to design some of those spring, summer, and fall experiences for the educators in your system to make sure that you're being smart, right? You're working smarter, not harder, but you're also not losing that human element that we know is so important to the learning process.
That's amazing. And I think such a timely topic, particularly for educators who are planning for the now, right? And planning, right, ahead. So, where can people connect with you? Where can they learn more about your work?
Feel free to feel free to visit my website, www.thelearningloop.com. I've also
Mhm.
been spending a ton of time on LinkedIn lately,
Nice. Mhm.
engaging with folks both inside and outside of the education community as we really think about what the next level of learning is looking like across the different education sectors that we work in.
Perfect. And I will link out for anyone who's listening today. You can click, follow along. Thank you so much for your time and for your insight today.
Thank you, Monica. I really appreciate the invitation and I look forward to continuing the conversation.
It was so much fun chatting with Allison today. So let's make this EdTech easy with a few key points from the episode. PD is still too one size fits all and needs more personalization for adults. Pre-session surveys help facilitators tailor PD to participant needs. AI can support professional development design by analyzing data and suggesting targeted trends. Educators need guidance on crafting more intentional, precise AI prompts to support their instructional planning. Remember, you can find show notes, all the links, all the ways to connect with Allison and the team at Jotform too by looking below this episode. Make sure to follow along so that you don't miss the next one in this technology and education series. A big thank you to Jotform, the presenter of today's episode. To learn more about Jotform and how educational institutions can get a 30% discount on Jotform Enterprise, head to jotform.com/enterprise/education.